Our session today is on faith and globalization and human rights, and we have today with us a guest, Ms. Joan O'Donovan, who describes herself as a political theologian. You can ask her maybe to tell you a bit more about what a political theologian does and who a political theologian might be described to be. But certainly political theology is engaged in teasing out political implication of some of the major theological concepts. And she has, as you know, written quite extensively on human rights, in particular about the emergence of the human rights and the history of them. She has taught at Oxford University together with her husband, also a moral philosopher, a moral theologian, and is presently teaching at the University of Edinburgh. I will make a few comments and then I will cede the floor to Ms. O'Donovan. Now, ever since 1948, language of human rights has increasingly spread around the globe, and some folks even think that human rights language is the new moral code. Some have even suggested that it is a new religion. And you'll already see it in that phrase, a kind of competition between old style and new style religions that some accounts, at least of rights or of religion, can suggest. But at the same time, the meaning of human rights is deeply contested, probably as deeply contested as ever. Some rights that were affirmed by United Nations in 1948 would likely not be affirmed by the same body today. Example, right to choose one's religion or change, in particular, change one's religion. It would be very difficult to pass that. Now, indeed, some scholars believe that were it given to vote today, the United Declaration of Human Rights would not be adopted. So what's going on? On the one hand, popularity, immense popularity of rights language. On the other hand, increased contestation of human rights and the meaning of human rights. Is it possible for human rights to serve as such, as a new global, as a global moral code? Well, even if it were possible, would it be desirable for human rights to serve as such? And some of the articles that we've read, Ms. O'Donovan's, but also to a certain degree also Charles Taylor's, question this, right? Do we need to look for something like an alternative to human rights? And in Taylor's case, it is almost human rights expressive of particular norms, and it's these norms actually that are binding globally, and our human rights are particular version, Western version, of expressing some globally binding norms, right? Right to life may be the way we express things, but commitment and obligation not to kill may be the norm that right to life is a particular way of expressing. So at any rate, there is a sense of both importance of the question and spread of human rights language. At the same time, questions about understandings, proper understandings and agreements on those, and even of the possibility of agreements on human rights rather than on something like norms. Now, human rights, if embraced, are deemed to be universal rights. But this is one phrase, right, for human rights, but it might have, and it does have, radically different, often radically different meanings. Example, and you can see, I think, some of that even in the texts for this week, I believe, freedom of religion. I already indicated that Universal Declaration on Human Rights speaks explicitly of the right to change one's religious belief. Many would embrace the idea of the freedom of religion, right to free exercise of religion, but would strenuously contest the idea that it includes the right to change one's religion. Different folks may give different preferences to different set of rights. I'm mindful, say, of the Cold War discussions about human rights, where societies in the West tended to favor negative rights, which the states are obliged to respect, something like civil rights, political rights, freedom of expression, for instance, whereas Eastern folks in the East, to which my formal country that no longer exists belonged, to Yugoslavia, right, emphasized very much positive rights, which state was supposed to guarantee social, cultural, economic rights, like the right of employment and right of vacation. And you've got similar kinds of maybe differences in the, between Islam and West today. If you take the text that we've read for today, Tariq Ramadan's, you'll see that most of the rights that he affirms belong to those kinds of what I've described here as a positive rights, whereas it's rather thin on rights highly prized in the West. And this may be also an indication of a very different conception of rights, right? And to quote from O'Donovan text, Western conception of subjective rights may be proprietary rights over his, her spiritual or corporeal capabilities and acts. That may be one version more amenable, right, to the negative definition of rights. Or it may signal something like in Tariq Ramadan's case, entitlements, kind of moral obligation that certain other people have in order to provide these benefits as far as it is possible, right? Something like right to solidarity. What do you do? How do you understand this as a right, strictly speaking, right? So it's important to keep in mind that what we mean when we invoke human rights in debates across cultures and religions. Also, what I think I want to draw your attention to, and by now it's kind of a mantra already that I just about every time invoke, and that's the self, social relations, and the good, right? And you can see it in understanding of human rights, how alternative ways of understanding what the self is, what social relations are, and the good is, how these are expressed. In O'Donovan's article, you have it tracing of the whole development, basically lining up the accounts of the self, social relations, and the good with political as well as in economic arrangements centered around the notion of human rights. You can see a similar thing being expressed again in freedom of religion. Freedom of exercise of religion, predominantly you have in Muslim communities, but also Jewish communities, until very recently, I think, in the Catholic tradition as well. Self is already defined by social relations. You're Catholic, you're Jew, you're Muslim, right? And communities have a stake in self being part of that network of these relationships, these particular social relations. Freedom of choice. I think self here stands much more on its own, who is in the act of choosing, aligning itself with others and belonging to a particular community. I think also our discussion with Muna Abu Sulaiman was very interesting in this regard, right? You've got the conception there of the self, right? In her case of what it means to be a female self, which was very much inserted in almost like a cosmic account of the world, right? Men are and women are like moon and the sun. Distinct roles. There are sort of natural ways in which men and women behave. Community, in this particular case, family, is being highly prized, and because of that, you kind of curtail your own behavior of the self, and have your own quote-unquote rights in the context of, defined in the context of the community. It's very much different than what most of you have expressed in this discussion, which is, I think, you reflected very much a Western understanding of rights, which is rights defined precisely against the kinds of communities of which she described herself as belonging, so that if anybody wants to deviate, quote-unquote, from that, they're quite able to do that, and their quote-unquote going other way would be precisely respected. Again, a very different understanding of who the self is, what the social relations are, and what the good is. And let me make a few comments also very briefly about religion and rights in particular, and then I'll just invite Ms. O'Donovan to speak to us. One way to understand the relationship between religion and rights, even if you embrace rights, defined as subjective rights, is to describe them as competing moral universes. A text which we haven't read, but we read last time around, Abu al-Fadl text on human rights from Muslim perspective, he says, well, there's a tension between convictional system of religion and of human rights. And the question is, which of these two generalized and objectified systems warrants deference, and which constitutes the ultimate frame of reference? Which one trumps which? I mean, this is a very important discussion, and it's important discussion in the whole context of globalization and pluralistic social spaces. You can understand them either as completely competing, or possibilities to understand them as subordinated moral claims. This has been generally the tradition in recent years of the Catholic Church, right? You've got theology states ultimate and general norms, and human rights reflection articulates specific norms that are to be subordinated to general ones. And generally, people with robust religious convictions, if they've embraced language of rights, this is roughly how they have formulated this. It being the case, I think that for most religious people, their religious worldviews are the overarching ones, and everything else has to kind of subordinate itself to that. And there's some folks who think that these are competing but complementary kind of accounts of norms. They have imperfectly overlapping bases of support in our culture, and both can be partly they're competitive, but partly they are overlapping. Now, two more comments about religion and human rights. The question that sometimes is being raised is what it is that can sufficiently justify respect for human rights, and even apart from justification of human rights, what can motivate people actually to respect rights rather than fight simply for their own rights, but take on the respect of human rights as a moral cause, respect and struggle for rights of others. There are folks who argue, some of you will not be surprised at that in this class, that actually only theistic grounding of human rights is possible. That is to say that you can advocate for human rights, but you can't give sufficient justification for those rights apart from some kind of a theistic, not atheistic, right? Some kind of a theistic framework. And generally the argument goes something like this. Well, you can ground rights in human capacities. But there are all sorts of folks who then fall out of the range of those capacities that you have specified as grounding human rights, something like rationality. Well, there are all sorts of folks who either aren't quite yet there, or have been impaired in sufficient significant ways, and our general intuition tells us that we ought to ascribe rights, if you ascribe rights to anybody also to them. And there's no way in which you can, alternative way in which you can ascribe rights, right, and therefore legitimize rights, except through some form of capacities and functions model. And that's inadequate. And so Nicholas Walterstorff, whose very nice book I very much like, and it's called Simply Justice. If you want nice, good reading, I recommend that book, about 400 pages of it. he argues that the only way really that you can justify human rights is by appeal to some kind of relationship between human beings and God and human beings. In his case, he basically says God has affection for human beings. He likes them. And things that you like, you invest in, right? There are investments in the things that you like, and that grounds human rights. His example is this little teddy bear of a child, right? So with whom the child has spent so much time, and if you were to show this teddy bear in a contest for the beauty of teddy bears, it may get the last place, right? But if you ask the kid which teddy bear is his or her favorite, it's the one with whom he or she has slept over the many months and many years. It doesn't matter what capacities the teddy bear has, right? What matters is attachment of the kid to the teddy bear. Something similar, Walterstorff argues, is the case in relationship between God and human beings. Quite apart from kind of capacities one has, it's the attachment and investment, in this case of God, in human beings that grounds their human rights, their intrinsic worth, and also human rights. Let me stop here and pass on the baton to Mr. Donovan.